Have you ever been in a relationship with a man and you feel like if your love and your care is being taken for granted? And even worse, he can't seem to realize or seem to know when you're hurting or when you're struggling in your own personal life or within the relationship. You ever been with a man who acts like your feelings and your concerns and your thoughts and your perspective don't really matter? He would say that he loves you, but you can see the selfishness, you can see the lack of empathy, and that he genuinely lacks interest in your life. He would always say that he's busy, he never makes time for you, he makes promises, he breaks them. You could ask for help for certain things and he never follow through, hardly ever follow through. And he only shows up in a relationship when it's convenient to him. He don't notice that you may be overwhelmed, you may feel drained. He doesn't even ask how you're doing, how you're really doing, right? You can tell that he's just carrying on his life like nothing matter and like that you matter. These are some of the signs that you're dealing with a self-centered, unconcerned, seemingly heartless man, right? But you might ask, why would you be with somebody like that? Why would you be a man like that? It's because men pretend to be caring, they pretend to be loving, they pretend to be kind. In the beginning, they literally switch up after weeks and months of pretending. And it's the moment when you let your guard down and you show them that you're interested in them and you open up emotionally, mentally, or physically, their mask start to slip. That is why, right? And some men might think, or they might say that I'm being too dramatic, calling men heartless and unconcerned and self-centered. I'm being too emotional, or I'm just overthinking things, I'm being too deep into things, or I might just be acting crazy, or I'm too sensitive. But it's about recognizing the unavailability, the emotional unavailability and self-centeredness in some men. And the problem with us women, we hold on to that fake version of them that they show us in the past. And when we just meet them and we wait and we hope that he will return back to the man that seemed interested in the beginning, right? So after a few weeks, after a few months, you will start to realize that their mask is slipping, or they start to look like a different person, right? They can't keep up the pretense. They have to, more than likely after time, you will see who people really are, right? And you will see things like they just don't give, or they just stop giving care and the attention that they used to give or that they promised. You realize that they are consciously always thinking of their needs first. They're thinking of themselves first, and then you must just adapt to whatever is happening with them or whatever is happening in the relationship. You may realize he never learned how to care for someone other than himself. Like when you ask about his past or ask about his upbringing and you start to ask questions and get to know him, you might realize that he possibly never really took responsibility or was held accountable for the impact he had on others when he was growing up, right? You could start to realize he has an undeveloped emotional capacity, and I talked about emotional capacity already before in previous videos. And emotional capacity is when a person, they have the ability to constantly feel, they can process, they can communicate, and they can respond to emotions, both their own and their partners, in a way that could maintain the connection over time, right? He lacks emotional capacity. He is emotionally immature, meaning he hasn't developed the ability to handle his emotions, his relationships, his responsibilities in a balanced way, in an adult way. So he react poorly under pressure, right? So when we say emotionally immature, which I talked about before in previous videos, it's just like poor emotional control, avoidance, avoiding accountability, being self-centered, inconsistent, hot and cold, cheating, acting up when things get serious, just not having the ability to deal with conflict without damaging the relationship. So when the mask start to slip, you realize that he lacked emotional intelligence, which is the ability to recognize and understand and manage your own emotions, and also understand and respond well to other people's emotions. It's what helps you to stay steady in a relationship. It helps you to communicate clearly and handle relationship without unnecessary conflict. So when their mask start to slip, you will realize emotional immaturity, lack of emotional capacity, don't have emotional intelligence, And they probably were in relationships where they never had to show empathy because women were always attracted to them and willing to be with them just because they might be an attractive man. And you could come to understand that he had emotionally absent parents, or he was neglected as a child. So they would never learn to develop values. He didn't learn to develop integrity, responsibility, and to be a reliable man, right? So probably their parents have been cold to them, inconsistent with caring for them, and this resulted in them genuinely not knowing how to care for somebody else. So we may not know exactly why he is showing up heartless, cold, and unconcerned, but it's very hurtful to be with somebody like that, and we need to protect ourselves from these types of men, right? We are not responsible for fixing them, and we did not cause them to become like that, right? So I'm going to continue with different subtle signs he is showing up like self-centered and unconcerned about you. And these are small things that you would notice, right? So you could notice his actions, or you could notice within yourself, within your relationship, or feelings coming up that you start to think your presence and your love, your kindness is taken for granted. You could realize that he's not checking in every day. You could realize that he's missing when you're hurting, he's missing when you're struggling, he's missing when you need help. You could realize he break promises, never follow through, and he doesn't feel guilty, he doesn't feel shame, right? Another thing, he could be just incapable or just unwilling to meet your needs, right? You could realize he's focusing on himself alone. He's focusing on what he got going on in his life. And also with that, he's dismissing your feelings and your concerns and your requests. So you feel like your requests and what you're bringing up is not as important. He never does anything special for you. He hardly dates you. He's not surprising you, or he just not trying to make you happy, right? You could feel that. Gives you the bare minimum, disappear when things get hard, or he does something wrong. If he do something wrong, disrespectful to you, hurtful behavior, disappear, right? Only show up when it's convenient to him. He might overwork and he hustle hard and he grind for himself, and he never plan out time to be with you, right? Keep you in the background, never prioritize you, only looking out for himself, and just basically put you on the back burner. So if you are feeling or thinking any of these, you should consider having a serious conversation, and more than likely ending the relationship, right? So you might ask, but why would men show up like that? Why are most men showing up self-centered, unconcerned, and heartless. Why they seem so heartless? Well, learned they learn from a young age that they should only focus on themselves and their own comfort, and this could be indirectly or directly, we don't know, and still they get in a relationship and they unconsciously expect to be prioritized while giving less, and this creates a one-sided dynamic where the woman is eventually gonna feel drained and unseen. So it creates an imbalance in the relationship, right? Why are they showing up like this? They might be genuinely unable to process someone else's vulnerability. They generally might not understand other people's feelings and emotions, This might still rely on other people to soothe them, to validate him, to carry the emotional weight he hasn't learned to carry for himself, right? And these men could still appear confident, but they're not, right? These men, they lack empathy, or they're just incapable of understanding the feelings of others because they could have had a rough upbringing, right? So for what I see, most men, when they have a rough upbringing, they lack emotional intelligence. And growing up, they never worked on their character. They don't work on values. They don't develop themselves. They don't look at their weaknesses or their flaws. They don't reflect on past hurts or the childhood trauma, right? They just continue growing up being self-centered, right? They genuinely might not know how to care for someone else. And they probably have some entitlement conditioning. If they didn't have a rough upbringing, they probably was like a mama's boy, right? They were not used to taking accountability and responsibility for their own actions, words. They got like special treatment, most likely from their mother, right? So they have this entitlement growing up. And this could also make them emotionally immature, where they lack emotional responsibility, right? If his mother just overmanage his feelings and, shield him from discomfort, he may not know how to regulate his emotions, handle conflict, or sit with hurt feelings. So he just avoid the feelings, avoid hard conversation because his mother coddled him growing up, right? He probably was placed on a pedestal growing up, right? So he was not corrected or held responsible growing up. So he struggled to admit that he did something wrong. So instead of owning mistakes, he would just shift the blame and just avoid you, right? And that's immature. So another reason why they have a big ego, protecting their ego because he was idolized, put on a pedestal, or he was seen as a perfect son by his mother, most likely, and that he can't do no wrong. So when you criticize him, he could feel like you're threatening him or you're attacking him. So he might just react defensively, or he just shut down, become dismissive when you challenge him, right? So those are some reasons why men, they grow up and they look and they seem, or they become self-centered and unconcerned, and they seem heartless. And there are many other reasons why they could become like that. They didn't process hurt, they betray. Some of these men, most of these men, they got cheated on, betrayed. Maybe they were not deeply invested in a romantic relationship. Sometimes they have stress from work, they have personal struggles they are going through, and they cannot balance their work, their personal life, and a relationship is just too much for them. So then they just be dismissive or they disappear, right? Or they just emotionally check out because they can't resolve conflict and it's too much for them. So they might not be heartless or self-centered, but they show up like that, right? Or they just unable to connect, genuinely unable to process other people's emotion, and that is very sad. So women should never be with these types of men, because while you're with them, while you're in a relationship with them, you're going to feel invisible, that you're not chosen. You should feel chosen every day. You're going to feel unwanted and like there's a lack of desire because they're not showing up for you like how they should. You're gonna feel like alone in the relationship because you can't rely on him. And there's going to be a constant disappointment over and over again. So you will feel like you're mistreated or like you're background noise. So all of this can cause you to feel stress in the relationship. You're anxious, you worry, you're disappointed about how things are unfolding, and you could also feel depressed just because of having this bad experience with this man. But in the beginning they show up caring, show up loving, show up nice, but then the mask starts to slip, and that could be confusing and that could lead to stress. So also your self-worth and your self-esteem could erode, could lose your self-esteem, your self-worth, because you're not having a good experience. So you start to think that you are not worthy or that something is wrong with you, right? You could feel like you're not significant, undervalued, overlooked, that you're undermined, and you feel like you're basically taken for granted, and like you could feel used and that you're not important. And that's a horrible feeling to have been in a romantic relationship with a man. So what to do in this situation, right? Obviously you should move on, you should end the cycle. That's the first thing you should do, to break up and end the cycle. Then the second thing, you really have to accept the truth clearly. Like, you need to understand that he could be unwilling, or he just not capable to give you the care that you need. You know, he has chosen his comfort over your well-being. So waiting for him is really pointless if they're unwilling or incapable, right? So you just have to accept the person that you're dealing with, accept the reality, accept that this is who they really are. Their mask slip. This is their true character. Yes, they lack integrity, they're unreliable, lack accountability, right? So we just have to accept that this man just incapable of having empathy, incapable of loving and caring for somebody else, not capable, lack the emotional capacity to understand other people's feelings, right? So just accept the truth. And the next thing, the third thing, is you could talk to somebody you trust about the situation. If there's no one, if you don't trust anyone to talk about that, you could talk it out loud with yourself, or you could write it down. You have to like stop idolizing the attraction or the passion that you had in the beginning. So you stop fantasizing and you see the reality for what it is. So when you express your anger or grief, you could feel disappointed that it didn't work out. You could feel embarrassed that you allowed this type of behavior to happen to you, that you would with this type of man. You could feel sad that you trust someone like this, but you just need to say it out loud. When you hear yourself talk about or express the bad things that you have experienced with this man, you will start to realize that you're making a bad decision for staying with them and continuing to be in a relationship with them. You're hurting yourself staying with them. So when you really talk it out loud to someone, you can hear that this is a bad situation and you are hurting yourself, right? So the next thing you need to do, obviously you break up, you end the cycle. You need to stop texting, stop calling, and stop checking his social media. You know, you need to treat him as someone from your past, not somebody who could affect you today. And you need to realize that life goes on. You have your own life to live. So you need to get back to your goals, get back to your creative work, get back to your hobbies, get back to the music you like, get back to the food you like, get back to your friends, your family, and all the things that you enjoy. So you also need to have like good self-talk, right? So you could say things to yourself like that you're choosing yourself. I'm choosing me. I don't need him. I'm worthy of being seen. I'm worthy of being desired and chosen, right? And he cannot give you that. So you need to have like internal conversation. Like, he cannot give me that. He lacks the emotional capacity. You release him. He lacks, like, he's not mature. He's emotionally immature, and you wouldn't want to be with somebody like that. You need to be having internal conversation and telling yourself that you're enough, that you're worthy, you deserve care, you deserve attention, you deserve warmth, love, you deserve to feel like a priority. This will create a internal validation, which is stronger than any external reassurance that you might be seeking, right? So the another thing you need to do is just visualize and like feel indifferent. So you're visualizing that you feel neutral about this. You are composed. You feel indifferent. You feel unaffected by this past situation, right? No emotional reaction, no longing for him. This is after you talk to somebody you trust, right? So the more you imagine it, the more your body and your mind will stop associating him with excitement and longing, right? So you just visualize. You could also visualize yourself with somebody who show up consistently, and with somebody who have emotional capacity, somebody who is emotionally responsible, right? Somebody who is emotionally mature, right? You have to know what you want to experience in your future relationship, how you want your significant other to look. You want to have the idea of how you want your partner to look in your next relationship, right? So those are about 5 to 6 things you could do to just break away and end the cycle, right? So if you have ever loved a man who is cold, emotionally distant, he seems unconcerned and is self-centered, that doesn't mean that you loved wrong. It doesn't mean that something is wrong with you, because most men are pretending in the beginning, right? It means you probably love deeply, and he might have told you that you are too much, you ask for too much, or you're overreacting and you're overthinking. Some men, they just do not know how to care, right? They automatically become dismissive, they automatically shut down. So some of them, they just move through life focusing on themselves, their comfort, their pleasure, their timing, and what they got going on for themselves, because that's all they know growing up, right? So you need to like stop waiting, stop hoping, and stop worrying about these type of men, because it could really feel devastating being involved with these type of men, and you would be questioning like your worth if if there's something wrong with you, if you will be wondering and questioning if you're actually overreacting, if you're actually overthinking, right? And you need to have a good internal conversation, positive, right? But the truth is a person who can ignore your pain is not someone who has the capacity to love you the way you deserve. And that has nothing to do with you and how patient you are, how loyal you are, and how loving you are. More than likely, it's because these men are showing up heartless, unconcerned, and like cold because of their upbringing, rough upbringing, lack of values, no accountability, parents neglected them, entitlement, the mother put them on a pedestal, they seem like they can't do no wrong, lack of values, they've never been held accountable, right? So they never worked on their character growing up. That is why they seemingly look like that. If you feel unseen, unchosen, or you're emotionally alone in a relationship, that is your answer. You're dealing with somebody who lack the emotional capacity, they're emotionally immature. They didn't work on themselves. Men usually do not reflect on past love trauma. They do not reflect on the relationships that didn't work, where they got rejected, neglected, cheated on, betrayed. They don't reflect. They don't work on their weaknesses. They don't work on their flaws. They just carry on and they think about themselves because that's all they know growing up, right? You don't need to chase foreclosure from someone who couldn't show up for you. You don't need to wait for someone who made you feel like an option. You don't need to shrink yourself to feel worthy or to get love or to feel loved, right? One day you will look back and realize losing someone who didn't care was not a loss. It's like a release. You should say, thank God it's over. You are released from waiting, hoping that he would change. You are released from feeling invisible, from feeling unchosen, from feeling undesired, right? And you just love the wrong person. And you are not asking for too much. You just love the wrong person, right? So that's the end of this video. I hope this helps. You can share and like the video, comment below if you like to, and I'll see you in the next video.